Welcome to Sky Talkers. Here are your hosts, Charlotte and Caitlin.
Hello, and welcome to Sky Talkers. I'm your host, Charlotte.
Hey, everyone. I'm your other host, Caitlin, and welcome to this very exciting episode where we are discussing the Acolyte, Episode 6, Teach and Corrupt. Teach/corrupt. Excuse me. Thank you. This episode...
Slashes are back.
The slashes are back. I don't know what's happening. Don't worry, we'll get into it. This episode aired on July 2nd, 2024. It was directed by Hanel Culpepper. It was written by Leslye Headland and Jocelyn Vo. And...
What is there to say?
I don't know. We don't even need to have this episode. I really don't know how we're going to get through this discussion. I'll be honest. It's going to be a lot. Strap in. We're very excited. But just a note on our director and writers. Jocelyn is also a consulting producer on this show. And she was also an actress and writer in Russian Doll, which was created by Leslye Headland as well. And Charlotte and I are obsessed with this episode. I think the entire internet is. And it's just really exciting that we have 3 women, in charge of this episode, 2 of them Black women. It's just really incredible. Kind of the whole creative team behind the Acolyte so far has just been incredibly diverse. A lot of women. I'm really excited. And This episode has been like the cherry on top. And we're not even done with the season yet. So anyway, it's going to be a good discussion. I'm really excited. We have so many freaking notes. I think our Google Doc is 10 pages.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that this will be our longest Acolyte episode yet. The female gaze. Oh, there's just like, I don't even know.
It was gazing.
It was gazing. I was gazing. We were all gazing.
We were all gazing. Jaw was on the floor.
Yeah, I cannot handle this episode. Like, welcome back, The Last Jedi. I just can't. Mm-hmm. Before we dive in, and boy, do we have a lot to say, we have a couple of things that we need to talk about on the pod.
That sounded so serious.
I know. It's not serious at all.
We have a couple of things to address.
So this weekend, Caitlin and I got to go to the Lucasfilm family picnic. The Lucasfilm Family Picnic this is the 44th one. It's a tradition that goes many years back that was held on the ranch, usually on 4th of July. And now it's close to 4th of July so that people can have a vacation. And it is on Skywalker Ranch where there's a barbecue. People bring like a potluck of salads and pasta salads and things like that. And then there's games like egg tossing, tug of war,
cornhole,
kayaking, and not boating. I don't know what's the word, like rowboating on Lake Ewok. And there's hay rides, there's horse rides, there's a petting zoo, there's softball, there's baseball, there's all of the Americana games. It's really cool. And it's a cool thing that they do for the Lucasfilm, ILM, Skywalker Sound employees. So we were lucky enough to be invited by a friend as like a +2, and it was a dream come true. It was really fun. Before we went, we were like, are we going to do the egg toss? And I feel like the egg toss is I've heard about it for years.
Yeah, I feel like
it is infamous.
The people that we know who have been to the Lucasfilm family picnic, they always talk about the egg toss. And we were walking around like prior to the egg toss. So I feel like I heard so many conversations of people around me talking about the egg toss. And a lot of them were talking about how, I'm not doing it this year because I got basically drenched in egg last year. And I'm like, it's one egg. Like, how serious?
I know, like, relax.
Be? And then I saw other people putting T-shirts over the clothes they were wearing should they be drenched in egg.
A genius move,
like, they brought backup clothes. They brought egg toss clothes. It was, honestly, a genius move. So we decided we had to do it too.
Yeah. So I think I was the one that really roped you into this. Mm-hmm. As usual, I think we got 4 tries of tossing the egg and not dropping it. And these 4 tries were pretty far apart too. I got to be honest. Like, if you've ever done an egg toss, like you can be really conservative with how far you step back between each go. With this one, I feel like people were really stepping far back. Like we were
Yeah.
10 feet apart by the end.
Yeah. And
maybe more than that.
And the final egg toss, the winners, the final 3, they were very far apart. Like they were chucking the egg across the field. It was so funny. And it was we got to see our friend Mac from Skywalker Sound, who, if you listen to our Skywalker Ranch episode, he's the one who toured us around, and he was there as well. And I thought it was so kind when we were telling him about the egg toss, and we were like, we got 4 tosses, and I don't know if he misheard us or was just being generous, and he was like, you got 4th place? And we were like, no. no.
We're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't lead with that.
I was like, absolutely not. Thank you so much for even considering that could be an option for us. No, we tossed it back and forth 4 times.
Without dropping it.
I will say, Charlotte was the one that dropped it. So.
Yep. Well, you're the one that threw it. It's a team effort.
It was a good throw. Okay. You kind of you had it and it kind of bounced out of your hand or something like that.
I think what happens, and this is the plight of the egg toss, is that when you catch something, you don't want it to break. So then you're gentle already. And so then that's why it can bounce out of my hand, because you don't want to grip it like you would like a softball, baseball.
Yeah. Yeah. But we didn't get egg on us, which was
exactly.
Nice. But yeah, the egg toss, infamous. A ton of people, so many people did it. It was really fun.
So they have a bunch of ice cream and snow cones, and they also have a photo booth, which we did. And Caitlin and I were waiting in line for the photo booth together. And all of a sudden, Dave Filoni was right behind us. And listen, Caitlin and I are just not in our approaching our heroes era. We're just kind of in a
awkwardly look from afar era.
Far era.
Well, it was so funny because we were standing in line for the photo booth, and the photo booth was in a little bus, so you would get in the bus and take the photos in there. And we're waiting in line. It's about a 15-minute line, and at one point I'm looking behind me and I see this guy talking to another guy, not in the line but near the back of the line. And I'm looking at the guy and I'm like, that really looks like the kind of jacket that Dave would wear. Because Dave, I think he's got an outfit, right? It's not the cowboy hat. He wasn't wearing the cowboy hat, but he does like a black zip-up hoodie. I feel like you see him in black zip-up hoodies a lot that are usually associated with different Star Wars projects. And this one had a big orange star on it and then a 66 in the star. And I was like, that feels like an Order 66 sweatshirt, zip-up hoodie. And I was like, that definitely feels like something Dave would wear. And then I'm looking too long, and then I realize, oh, that is Dave Filoni. And I turned back to Charlotte, and Charlotte's talking to me about something, and I'm like, look behind you. Look behind you.
And I looked.
And it was him.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. So he goes through this line, talks to some people that he knows, and then he's on his way. And he was talking to someone really close to us, or like 2-3 feet away from us for a little bit, what seems like a substantial amount of time. And I just was really overcome with emotion. I don't even know. It was so embarrassing, but I was kind of tearing up, oh my God, here Caitlin and I are at the Lucasfilm picnic somehow here, and Dave Filoni's right there, and oh my God, I can't even handle this. What even is life? Yeah, so I was just kind of tearing up.
She low-key was tearing up. It was she had her sunglasses on, and I was like, "Are you crying?" She was like, "No."
In our picture, I think you can tell that I was just crying, and it's just silly. I don't even know. And then, not 5 minutes later, Kathleen Kennedy kind of walks through the crowd. She was giving real short girl energy. She is, me and her are the same height. And it was even exacerbated by the fact that we were wearing the same shoes. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool. We saw her and she was on her merry way. At that point, I think I had stopped crying. Just to be very clear, I keep it together. Okay.
It was a very contained cry. It was really, you were really just kind of tearing up. Yeah. But it was funny because then once we left the photo booth, we were walking up to get a drink and Dave passed us again. And I turned to Charlotte. I was like, did you see him again? She goes, no. Charlotte goes, you're being so quiet when you see Dave Filoni. You have to be louder about this. And I was like, I can't. He's 2 feet away from us. I'm not going to be like, Charlotte, Look. So then it was so funny because then later when this is before the egg toss, we're in line for the egg toss and Charlotte is across from me, right? And Dave is going up and down the line, like talking to people like, good luck on the egg toss. Like, let's see how far those eggs are going to go. You know, he's like making small talk and he's going up and down the line. And Charlotte does not notice.
I was just talking to my friend. Like, I don't know.
Talking to someone next to us, and I'm trying to be telepathy across the way. I'm staring holes into her head.
I could have gotten a good luck from Dave.
You could have. I didn't. He didn't say it like directly to me. You know, he's just kind of walking. It's a long line. Like, again, there are a lot of people doing the egg toss. But he literally walked by twice in the middle of the line, so literally directly in front of us. And then he walked behind me. So like Charlotte would have been facing him again. And every single time you did not see it at all. And I was like, I cannot.
It's for the best. Like, I needed my game face on. I need to be so focused on the egg toss. After when we lost, though, and we were watching the rest of the egg toss, he was like right behind me. And so was Kathy, too.
Yeah. Yeah. From where we went to go finish watching the egg toss.
I did see that.
Yeah.
And I was aware of that.
Yeah. To be clear, we weren't following him. It kind of
we
sounds
weren't.
like
No,
we
no,
were.
it's a small area.
Yeah. It just kind of ended up that way.
Yeah. I just feel like we had to share that on the pod. And that was like a very small part of our day. But like.
Yeah. But it was very fun. Yeah. So thank you to our friend Jess who invited us. We had a wonderful
amazing time.
The Lucasfilm family picnic was so much fun. And if you want to see any pictures from it, there are pictures on our Instagram. So you can definitely go and check those out if you want a little bit of a look at, I don't know, what that kind of event looks like, because we had an idea, but not a full idea of kind of how everything works. So it was really fun. And it's a huge part of Lucasfilm history, obviously, the 44th annual. So it's really cool to have been able to do that.
Let's talk about the Acolyte and this episode, Teach Corrupt. So, how we doing?
Not well.
Enemies to lovers, full-fledged.
I don't think in my wildest imagination I could have foreseen an episode like this in Star Wars.
Yes, you could have.
That's the thing. I could have, but I don't think I would have ever believed that it would have pushed the envelope this far, you know, in Star Wars. It's just, I mean, we had a naked man in this. I just need to say it. I just need to start and say that. And that has never happened.
It hasn't. We've seen chest.
We've gotten close.
We've seen arm. We've seen many things, but we've never seen fully undressed. Like, it's not like we saw that either, by the way.
Yeah.
But like, we literally bathing in a lake with someone witnessing and someone know. It's just like, what is this? My mouth was on the floor.
Literally,
in a good way.
Yeah, I was watching these opening scenes like this. There is, and that's when you know, right, that things are gonna continue to build in a way that we have not seen yet in Star Wars. And we're really excited to talk about this episode, obviously, for all of those reasons. There's a lot of Reylo parallels, a lot of, I should say, the Last Jedi parallels, really. The whole setup on this unknown planet is incredibly similar to what we see in The Last Jedi and a lot of the things that Qimir and Osha are talking about. There's also a lot happening with May and Sol and Vernestra and the Jedi, and this was just a great this episode was just so good. And usually we kind of talk about our TV discussions in chunks, but we are going to go scene by scene this time, or kind of, you know, location by location as we switch between Osha and May and Vernestra, just because I don't think we would have been able to keep the discussion on the rails at all if we tried to just kind of go in unorganized, which is kind of what we do in these discussions. But I think we should start first with the title, because the slashes are back. Teaching, corrupting, who is being taught and who is being corrupted. I think it's easy to say that Qimir is corrupting Osha and Sol is teaching May. But I think they, like in our first two episodes of Revenge and Justice and Lost and Found, I think both of these terms can apply to both of our sisters. And how is May being corrupted? Or maybe she's being uncorrupted, or perhaps it's Sol who's being corrupted. He definitely had a little bit
was going through it.
He's going through it. He was a little scary at the end. I'll say that.
Yeah.
And then Osha is she's being opened up to a new world, I would say, which is both teaching her something and also potentially corrupting her. I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
She even uses the word corrupt in this episode. So I don't know. I was very excited to see the Slash is back. I have no idea if we'll see it next week. Again, what is pattern? I'm not really sure, but they're definitely appropriate for when May and Osha are separated.
Mm-hmm. If the title is Teach/Corrupt and we start with Osha, I think you can say that Osha, I mean, it's kind of easy to say this, and maybe this isn't correct, but that Osha is being taught, but she's also being corrupted. Like everything that you said is accurate. And I think it's really interesting to compare the different types of, I guess, like prisons that are built in both May and Osha's environments.
Mhm.
Like she's taken after being knocked out and comes back to this lair. We're going to get into this obviously, but the comparison, I guess, with how Osha was treated in Qimir's lair, which is pretty well, right? I don't even need to sugarcoat it. Like she had a bed, like he tended to her wounds. He didn't kill her, right? Like he did his other people. And then I guess then the moment that Sol, if he realized it the entire time, who knows? But the moment Sol sort of identifies that he's with May and not Osha, he ties her up. It kind of forces her to listen, which I think is fine, but it was kind of scary for a second. And it's just really in contrast to what was happening with Osha there. And then I think with the corruption that can come from, if we want to compare like the Sith and the Jedi, May is being sort of awoken to what are the truths that the Jedi cling to. And then I think in contrast, we have the ending scene with Osha putting on the helmet that she was introduced to, which we usually see as something that is an imprisonment, right? Something that is, when we compare it to Vader, it is like he's trapped in that helmet. But for some reason, the contrast here is that it's a sort of sense of freedom, and the breathing becomes like very steady at the end. I have a lot more to say on that, but I think we're seeing two opposites of what we would normally consider corruption and imprisonment too, throughout this episode with our two sisters.
I also think the idea of corruption, of someone like Osha being corrupted by the dark side, I think in that conversation of Jedi and Sith and their ideological views on the world, I think there's also a world where someone like Sol can be corrupted by guilt, and the way that he has decided to deal with the trauma, the guilt, his own actions with whatever happened on Brendok, that could also be a form of corruption to him as well. And, we see Qimir last week say, "I've accepted my darkness. What have you done with yours?" And I think that could be another form of corruption as well. So we definitely hopped around a lot to different scenes within that discussion on the title. So it is something we'll be coming back to. So let's start in the very beginning. Osha wakes up in the stranger's phantom lair, which this felt very Phantom of the Opera. The Phantom takes Christine to his lair underneath the theater. It's the point in the movie where she begins to actually learn who the Phantom of the Opera is. And that was a huge influence for Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi. It's one of his favorite films as well. So I think to have Qimir, the stranger, take Osha, as soon as we opened on Osha on the bed, I went, "Are we in the Phantom lair?" And then the camera pans out and it's the Phantom lair. It even has a water element to it, a little hot tub. I texted you that the flooring almost looked like melted candle wax, the way that it was
in that like sub level.
Yeah, on the sub level. It's later in the show when Osha is sitting on the floor having a conversation with Qimir, I think about the mask, so right at the very end. But the way that the flooring is designed, I guess like it's meant to look like water has been flowing and, kind of creating these waves or undulations in the rock. But to me, it kind of looked like melted candle wax. And Phantom of the Opera, especially in the Phantom Lair, has a lot of candles. And I don't know, just all that imagery was kind of sitting.
Gothic.
Yeah, exactly. Very gothic. I think also a huge note about all of these scenes that take place on this, unknown planet. There's a heavy musical element of strings, I would say, the violin, other string instruments, which I think also really plays into that gothic tone. Very dark romance. Also felt very Phantom of the Opera to me, and it's very clear that there's a shift in the musical tone when we come back to Osha and Qimir. And like I said, it's very string heavy, in my opinion, and kind of adds to that romance, that desire, that darkness that I think Qimir and Osha are really talking about throughout this episode together. I was listening to Children of the Watch last week, and they mentioned this thing that I don't think we've really talked about on the show so far, of that we often see Osha waking up throughout every week in the Acolyte. It feels like she's constantly waking up somewhere, often somewhere new. And that was very similar here. And it also kind of gives that Alice in Wonderland, falling down the looking glass, waking up in new places, very mysterious. All of that kind of seems to fall into place as well when we're thinking about what Osha is going through and how she's kind of waking up in these new places and discovering new things about the galaxy that are kind of taking her on new paths. And especially here with Qimir, she's waking up. She has no idea where she is. She's now with the villain in an unknown place. What is going to happen to her here?
Yeah. In our notes, you say that her wound has been healed. I don't think it has been force healed, though. It's been bandaged, which I think is something different than the force healing. For some reason, her wound and her outfit being changed and her having this big bandage on her in kind of an intimate location, I think really shows some sort of care that went into it. And I don't think it's I don't think you're saying this, but I don't think it is force healing. And I just wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week about that. Also, per the Alice in Wonderland thing, I think this is truly what I was trying to get at when I was talking about last week, the whole red dust, the psychedelic nature, and I just couldn't get there in terms of falling into the looking glass. And it bothers me sometimes when I'm editing and listening to a conversation. Caitlin and I have this experience all the time. We listen to a conversation, and it's you just needed one more sentence to get there. You're so close, but you couldn't get there. And that was exactly what I was trying to get in. So I'm glad that we brought that up again there, because I do think there's an element of Osha and May both, I think, falling and experiencing and being, waking up in different elements, and how that is different starts of different journeys. Yeah. And it makes me think of Russian Doll, actually, which Leslye Headland's other huge show, which is essentially like a Groundhog Day situation where the same character wakes up in the same situation over and over and over again and has to repeat the journey until she has a breakthrough. And that's obviously not what's happening in the Acolyte, but each episode really does begin with the same beginning of waking up and starting a new journey, and how are you going to tackle this today, and all that to say there's definitely something there about her constantly waking up and different scenes, always starting with that.
I think one thing that we'll probably be talking a little bit as we continue throughout this conversation is the differences between how Qimir presented himself to Osha versus May as a master. I think a big part of the first 4 episodes of the Acolyte was no one knowing who the master was, right? And Sol and Vernestra talk about this. Sol tried to read May's mind. There's that huge conversation, I think in week 2, where he says she doesn't even know who the master is. How can you serve a master you don't know? And Sol and Qimir even talk about that once he finally is revealed. And there's kind of this whole question about who the master is and why no one has seen his face. And then once he is finally unmasked, Qimir says he's going to have to kill everyone who has seen his face. And that includes May for a time being. He obviously kills all the other Jedi. He attempts to kill Sol. But with Osha, there's not that same expectation, I guess. He's totally fine for her to know who he is. Whereas with May, he was not. And the difference between how he, like I said, how he presents himself with Osha or with May, he is this friend, the fool who is trying to help her on her mission to the master. He's posing as someone who also is beholden to the master. But with Osha, he's completely revealed and completely vulnerable. And it's definitely a very different approach. I think it's safe to say that Qimir, the stranger, is still very much in the driver's seat with both Osha and May, and even in this episode with Osha, as far as kind of leaning into the seduction, into manipulating her with this seduction. But it's very clearly enemies to lovers. And I think that I feel like watching episode 2 back when he first meets Osha, when she's posing as May and we see that flip in him where he goes, "Oh, you look just like her." I think that's kind of him seeing that there's something different in how he could approach Osha versus May. And maybe the first inkling that, oh, maybe I've been backing the wrong horse here. You know what I mean? Like maybe this is actually something I can connect with more. And he even says later down at the lake about how he can't read her mind, but her anger betrays her. And I feel like that's probably something he could have read into their first meeting on Olega as well.
We learn a lot about Qimir in this episode, namely that he was previously a Jedi. He has some scars on his back. There's some vulnerability there that is very established with imagery. But I do feel like we still don't really know him by the end of the episode, which I think is good because there's that enemy, there's that darkness, there's that alluring need to learn more from him. But I'd like to spend a little time talking through his name, which I didn't really dig into until I was looking at, honestly, our transcripts that are on Apple Podcasts. And the way that we talked about last week, how Qimir kind of sounds like Kylo, Kai. It's very much there. And we talked about the Knights of Ren theory and things like that. But one thing I didn't put my finger on is the fact that our transcripts transcribed Qimir not spelled the way that Star Wars spells it, which is Qimir, but instead ChimerE, which is a derivative form of the Greek mythological creature called a chimera. Very interesting. When I was like, oh my God, here we go again. This is very much on the nose and we missed it, but we didn't miss it. We're here talking about it. Okay. So I'm going to read this from Wikipedia. Again, whatever. A chimera is from the Greek mythological creature, which is composed of different animal parts. Typically, it's depicted as a lion with a goat's head protruding from its back and a tail ending with a snake's head. Some representations also include dragon's wings. The term chimera has come to describe any mythological or fictional creature with parts taken from various animals, to describe anything composed of disparate parts or perceived as wildly imaginative, implausible, or dazzling. In other words, a chimera can be any hybrid creature. In figurative use, it's derived from the mythological meaning chimera, which refers to an unrealistic or unrealizable, wild, foolish, or vain dream, notion, or objective. What do we think about that, Caitlin?
What do we think about that? I think it's kind of perfect for Qimir and everything that he's representing, especially to Osha as he's seducing her to the dark side. This unrealistic, wild, foolish, or vain dream is it her being on the dark side and even achieving these goals of tapping into her power. And even for Qimir himself, what he says is he wants a pupil. He wants the ability to exist. The Jedi say he can't exist. The ability to use power the way that he wants to use it. And is that foolish? Is that a vain dream? I think in the time of the Jedi, it kind of is. And that's what the Witch Coven was hinting at. This is what Qimir is talking about now. I think
the Acolyte kills the dream.
Yeah, the Acolyte kills the dream. So I think it's incredibly appropriate. I love how the chimera it's multiple different animals, and the way that you kind of see it traditionally, it sounds like, is as a lion and a goat and a snake. And these are all of these creatures have their own, all these animals have their own metaphorical leanings and connotations with them, right? A lion versus a goat, right? That's like the sheep and the wolf. The snake, someone who is treacherous, someone who is sneaky, right? They all have these different meanings when we put them into stories. And so the idea that Qimir could be all of these things at once, which the chimera is, right? It is a lion, it is a goat, it is a snake. In a traditional depiction apparently, and so it can have all of these characteristics, and they can all still be true. And I think that is true for Qimir and true for most of our Darksiders as well, right? Especially the ones that we get to know really well, like Anakin and Kylo, and those types of characters. They often they don't lie; they tell the truth, but there is something snake-like about them as well. He's telling the truth, but he's also manipulating her, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is the lion, someone who's ferocious and strong, has strength, king of the jungle.
It's like the Garden of Eden, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This snake tempting.
Yeah, exactly.
Eve.
But then the goat, I think, is some type of animal that is kinder, gentler. You see him at a petting zoo. You know what I mean?
Wiser too.
Yeah.
Wise old goat.
Yeah, wiser. And that there's something more approachable about the goat versus the snake. And then there's something a bit fearful about the lion too. So I think all of this, I think this feels like a direct connection to why Qimir might have been named Qimir.
So one thing, I just want to hone in on one thing that you said, which is all of these things can be true at once. There's several different things happening at the same time with a character like Qimir, with a creature like the Chimera, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brings me back to our discussion about Rashomon. The Rashomon effect means that, we talked about this previously, but Akira Kurosawa's movie Rashomon, I think people often think that what Rashomon is showing is that there's all these different perspectives of one occasion or one occurrence. In Rashomon, it's a crime, and I think in The Acolyte is also a crime. And we will probably see another perspective of such crime next week. But what the movie Rashomon actually does say, and we talked about this, is that all those people's perspectives on the same thing are still valuable senses of truth. And I think what ultimately we're trying to get at with The Acolyte, and what Leslye Headland is interested in exploring, is that so many different truths can exist at once, and they're all still valuable, and they're all still held in the same arms, I guess. And same with the concept of it's like it's all analogous to each other, right? The Chimera is several different creatures all at once. It's holding different values, it's holding different dreams, and maybe they're out of hand. The concept of the past can be viewed through all these different lenses, but each different perspective from each different person who experienced it is still valuable because that's their own truth. The Jedi can have all of their different perspectives and about what goodness is, what selflessness is, but it still can affect certain people in different ways, and maybe doesn't work for some people, and maybe is like a fruitless dream. I don't think that, but I think that several different perspectives can exist at once, right? And I just think that what I'm interested in with the show is what Leslye Headland is hoping to say about the Jedi, what they're hoping to say about the Sith. And I think what I do think she's trying to get at is just the nuance behind the perspectives of all these different bodies that we're very familiar with in the Star Wars galaxy, and how there's just several different parts of the whole, right? And I think you even get that with the representation of the twins. While the witches wanted them to kind of represent the same thing, they're not. They're different perspectives. They're different. They're on different paths, and they represent different perspectives. Yeah, I think I'm interested to see like how we land this ship, but I think thematically we're all getting at the same thing with these different elements that are brought into the story.
Yeah, these contradictions that
are valuable
Yeah.
in themselves.
Mhm, yeah, and even when they're placed together as well.
Mhm.
That someone
Mhm.
who is a Darksider like Qimir can also have points to be made about the Jedi Order, and vice
Yes.
versa as well. So the next scene we have is just a short scene, and it is Osha walking on the planet at the beach, and we see Qimir walk behind her. We see these little baby creatures. They look like thalassirens. StarWars.com just came out that they're
Yep.
not baby thalassirens.
But it's okay that they look like baby thalassirens, because they're
They
still
look-
evoking the same thing that we saw in
Exactly.
The Last Jedi, which is like really off-putting and unsettling
Yeah.
at first, and then you kind of like grow to love.
Yeah, the thalassiren, if it's been a minute since you've watched The Last Jedi, it's a huge
Sea cow.
sea cow, which is one of my favorite tidbits about the behind the scenes of The Last Jedi, is that they literally helicoptered in this giant sea cow on Skellig Michael a
Sacred preserved site.
yeah, a World Heritage site, a UNESCO World Heritage site. They helicoptered this giant sea space cow onto it. It's just it's so absurd.
It's so funny.
It's so funny to me. But it is the sea cow that Luke Skywalker milks with the green milk that he drinks, and is really also unsettling to Rey as she is watching him and following him around on this island. And I think we see these tiny creatures a couple of times, and they kind of grow to like Osha or warm up to Osha. I think it's interesting that they are a little family. They've got a little baby with them. They do look, the whole silhouette of them, I would say, is like the Thalasiren shrunk down about 800 times smaller than the actual Thalasiren. And again, this episode just has so many visual and story beat similarities to The Last Jedi that it can't be anything but purposeful. You know what I mean? The environment.
Even just saying unknown planet, your brain immediately goes to Octo.
Yeah.
However, I don't think it actually is Octo.
Mm-hmm.
The more I sit on it, the more I think, oh, I think this is different. First off, it wasn't filmed at Skellig Michael, which is fine. It's not that all of Octo was filmed at Skellig Michael. Some of it was filmed like not on Skellig Michael, but in the coast of Ireland and stuff. But I've seen people chatter online about something that Caitlin and I don't know anything about. We're learning, okay, that there's a planet that is rich in Cortosis that was in some Plagueis novel. This feels like something that Leslye would be interested in and exploring. And by the end of the episode, we see this big vein of Cortosis on the wall in the cave. So I don't think Acto has that. They could, but it feels so particular that we would say unknown planet here instead of just leaving it be, like perhaps we would have in Rogue One when it came to Vader's castle on Mustafar.
Right.
It feels like we're supposed to dig into this a little bit. And I think it's okay for our brain to go to immediately to Octo, because what we're experiencing are echoes of what happens with Rey on Octo, but then also with Kylo through Force visions and like the Force bond.
Yeah.
So really interesting. I also think that these tiny little creatures, these mini Thalasirens that aren't mini Thalasirens, are telling a story throughout too that are sort of reflective of, I think, Osha's emotions that she's experiencing on the island, right? We see at first this like baby get really scared of Osha when in the very beginning, when Osha's kind of looking through May's stuff, when she finds May's stuff in the cave. And then later we see the the little babies relaxing on the ocean front. We see them snuggling with their family. We see a baby. We see them warming up to the environment. And I just feel like there's a story being told here. I don't really know what the story is. I mean, I kind of do. I just feel like we're getting it's like what I just said. Osha is getting warmed up to the environment, and we're telling that story through these little baby creatures. It is kind of wild. We see a whole family snuggling together.
It's interesting. If we're seeing this little family, is it supposed to be metaphorical for Osha finding a new family, creating a new family, a new partnership with Qimir? A lot of questions to be had. And I will say, I think I was also reading that the planet that people think this is, not Octo from the Plagueis novel, I believe I saw people saying that that's also the planet where Plagueis kills his master. Don't quote me on that. Obviously, this is not our wheelhouse.
Forte.
But
yeah.
I think I saw that. So that's also an interesting component if that ends up being true and where we actually are. So again, just food for thought. We end the scene with the stranger walking behind Osha, which is when we first see him. And it's clear Qimir is driving the bus here. He's in control. He knows Osha is going to follow him. That's why he walks purposely behind her without saying anything to her. The next scene we have is back on Khofar with May and Sol, and they're leaving. Sol can't get a message through to the Jedi Council and Vernestra. He's trying to tell them that the whole team is gone, and he's clearly shaken from the events on Khofar. And I know we're going to be talking a lot, it feels like, about Osha and Qimir, but Sol, he did such an incredible job throughout this week of all of these emotions that he is experiencing. Like later on in the scene when he goes to reset the transceiver, turn on and off the Wi-Fi essentially, there's no dialogue. It's just such this long, sad moment where we get to see everything play out over his face of what has just happened in the past, I don't know, 12 hours or however long it's been. And we see him, like smash the table. We see a moment of anger, true sadness, and then just it's almost like you can see himself trying to pull himself back together as he finally does reset the Wi-Fi and then has to go back upstairs. I still can't decide if when Sol realizes that it's May, if he's known the whole time, or if he figures it out at some point throughout the episode. But regardless, he's just going through so much. And I think that this scene with him resetting the transceiver really stuck with me. It really stood out of just how long it is, how long they just stay locked in on his face. And again, everything, you can just see all the thoughts in his head swirling and all the intense sadness. And I think it could be an indicator of how he was able to kind of tamp down that guilt of whatever happened on Brendok. And we're kind of seeing a piece of that here where, he lets these emotions out a little bit in this moment, his sadness, but then he pushes it all back down, turns back on the Wi-Fi, and gets back to his job like a true Jedi.
Yeah, I think Lee Jung-jae's acting in that was, you just saw so much on his face. It was so perfect. It's very clear to me why Leslye Headland saw this actor in Squid Game and was like, you are Master Sol. There's so much going on. I think throughout these scenes with Sol and May on the ship that I think is really interesting is the powers going on and off, right? And there's a lot of shifting in the lighting. And when the lighting is fully out, I feel like we're getting a different, really anguished Sol that is unsettling. I think this is a good time to talk about the posters that Star Wars releases each week on social media. So they commission an artist to do a poster a week for each of the episodes. And part of the Acolyte's logo is an eclipse. We've already talked about this before. We've talked about it already, about how cool these posters are and how they're representative of what's going on in the story. But I don't think we've talked enough about the fact that last week was a full eclipse of the sun where the two moons were meeting. Sun, moon, I don't know. Two moons were meeting and they were fully on top of each other. It's a full eclipse. And now we're moving into the next phase. So we were, waxing and waning until we got to the eclipse, which is where everything really shifted. So we got the big switcheroo last week with the twins swapping places. But it does feel like once we had this eclipse that it was happening, everything is kind of turning on its head, including Sol. And so when the lights are out, it's like you get this other glimpse into Sol that wasn't
into like his interior.
Exactly. But you don't exactly see that like super kind-hearted, super soft personality that we saw in the last 5 episodes. Instead, we see someone who is really shaken up, really broken. And I think you used the word scary in the beginning when we were talking. And I think that's what we have here, where I couldn't predict what his next move was. When we're dealing with Qimir, I didn't feel like at any point Qimir was going to kill Osha. So when we compare these two, like masters, and I guess, Qimir says pupil. I need to go on a rant about the word pupil, which is like, I really don't like it. But because I think he says like master and pupil, and I think he's talking about master and apprentice, but instead it's something different, meaning it's like master and partner. And that's what he means by pupil, I think. But anyway, I just feel like with Sol, I just got this real like unsettled feeling, and I didn't get that with Qimir, which I think is interesting. And I think it really speaks to the fact that we're in this next phase of the moons, and that is depicted by our weekly posters. And when we put them all next to each other, I think we'll see this progression of the different phases of an eclipse, with last week's being the height, and then this week being completely shifting into a new phase, the next part. And Leslye Headland in a recent Inverse article, which I can't believe we haven't talked about this, like we're entering into a new phase. We're experiencing, I think she used welcome to your new fave when it comes to Qimir. But I think this like flipping on its head of what's happening with Sol and Sol's emotion and seeing this other side of Sol, like genuinely have no idea what he's going to tell May now that he's tied her up and forcing her to listen.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you use the word unsettling, because that's what Leslye and Manny were talking about when describing the stranger. And that's how they wanted him to be perceived, as kind of unsettling, uncanny a little bit in how
He is.
Yeah, he is. But then now to also kind of be applying that to Sol, which I think is a good descriptor of him this week, is fascinating, because the other part of the posters is that they're in this kind of triangle three subject narrative, I would say, throughout all of the posters. There's usually someone in the center, and then there's two sides in the background. So there's someone in the foreground, in the center, and then two sides in the background. And they've switched out week to week as the eclipse has moved towards totality, which is what we saw last week. And last week, during the full eclipse, Osha was in the middle. We talked about it. Osha was in the middle, Qimir was on the left, and then May was on the right side in the background. So what is it going to be this week? And what I think, they're all saying something about where all our characters are going and the choices in the past that they're going to be making. So I don't know. I'm really excited to see we haven't seen it yet, so we can't add it to our discussion here. But I'm really excited to see what this new depiction for this week is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
We also see in this moment on the ship, before May and Sol leave Khofar, May walking around in the ship, and we're hearing her memories of her test with the Jedi all those years ago. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we only saw Osha's test.
Yep, we haven't seen it.
Yeah, we haven't seen any of May's tests, but we hear pieces of it. Obviously, it's very similar to what Osha experienced of what do you see on the screen? A cup.
A ship, a cup, a speeder.
Yeah. But it's just a reminder that there are still pieces of that story back then that we don't know. Obviously, there's everything with Sol and the Jedi, but there's also some of May's story that we don't know. And yeah, I thought that was a good addition to this sequence. And before we end this sequence, of course, we have Basil sniffing around. He was definitely the comedic relief throughout, and he's trying to put Pip back together, charge him up. I thought it was funny. It was almost like he couldn't find the right charger. Like, which USB port do I use for Pip? It's very
USB-C.
Yeah.
Or no.
What's the latest update for Pip? I don't know. But next, this is when we really get started, y'all.
It's taken us almost an hour to get here.
I'm sorry. I know this is what you all are waiting for. This is the scene. Now, Qimir has led Osha to the lake, and he takes it quite literally all off and gets in the water.
Qimir gets naked.
That's in our notes. I totally did not think they would push it this far. I thought after he took off his shirt that they would kind of pan out and we would see that he's wearing like galactic swimming trunks, and then he would get in the water. But no. They made sure you knew he was fully naked in this scene. We also get to see the huge scar on his back, and he just starts swimming out.
It's like we really pushed do you have a cowl or something you can put on from The Last Jedi to the next level? Every time we see a character, it's the oldest trick in the book. Like, they're taking off their clothes, they're getting vulnerable. When Kylo is undressed and Rey is like trying not to look, it's when Kylo is really pushing Rey and sharing sort of his darkest secret and the reason why he is who he is today, because of Luke Skywalker coming into his room at that point. And also it's forcing Rey to see something that she like doesn't necessarily want to see through Kylo, but at the same time like has to see because it's the truth, or Kylo's truth, and she needs to understand that. And immediately after that, obviously we get in The Last Jedi, it's not immediately after that, but it's pretty soon after that we get the hand touch scene, or as Mark Hamill says, the closest thing where we get to a sex scene in Star Wars.
Might have to revise that.
I know.
now.
I was thinking that the
So-
entire time. I was like, oh my gosh, Mark.
Yeah.
You said that, but I think that's different now. I feel like what we're seeing here, just to like bring it back to this, to what this represents, is just absolute vulnerability. This is him, Qimir, acknowledging and knowing that Osha's watching, and then also
It's like voyeurism.
it is, and it's like, you should see me for who I am, be comfortable with who I am. If you're not going to join me, I'm going to get out and put back on my clothes. But I can't believe you said that.
Okay.
I,
Basically
I
fell
feel
out of my seat.
another thing to point out is the moment I saw a character get into water, especially fully naked. You know what I always say on the show? This is a full baptism, and I don't really know what we're baptizing here. I think you can say that we're baptizing this is like
we're cleansing our sins.
We're either cleansing our sins, which I don't think we actually are, but like I think we're experiencing like a rebirth, a renewal of how we understand Qimir and how we understand this character that we didn't know before, but we were introduced to in a different way. This is a different side of him. This is him bathing in these like clean, beautiful waters and coming out and putting on a white blouse that is so romanticism. It's unreal. Like this is the symbolism here is villain in a white shirt. It's billowy. It is Mr. Darcy. It is the opposite of the good boy Ben sweater that we get at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. It's kind of cut from the same cloth. Ben's is black. This is white. And I think we're supposed to be seeing Qimir again in a new light. Previously, we've seen him in these insane. First off, when we're first introduced to Qimir, not the dark side version of Qimir, we experience him in a lot of like cloaks in so much fabric, and then we experience him with the mask and the unmasking that happens in the last episode, and then here we have him undressing and putting on a white tunic. It is renewal. It is a new perspective. It's us coming at him with new eyes and like starting anew. And I feel like that's what Osha's experiencing. And I think we as an audience are a little on edge about that because we're like, oh, whoa, this is Star Wars. We're used to like characters who wear white being good and characters who wear black, like exploring the dark side. Like, oh my gosh, what do we think about this? Right. In terms of outfit theory. And I think that's on purpose, right? Because I think this is probably the part of the corruption in the title. But at the same time, like we're hearing him out. It's the seduction part of the dark side.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like this is all fully seduction on Qimir's part. He knows what he's doing. I mean, the point where he says, if you're not going to join me naked in the lake, I'm going to get dressed again. But then he proceeds to come out of the water, have a full conversation with her before putting his clothes on.
Yeah.
You know, and there's just something about that is so intimate and so like, should I be here watching this? Do you guys need a minute kind of thing? You know what I mean? And he says, you're wondering if it's honorable to kill me like this. The heat of battle, it's justified, but a few hours later, it's vengeance. Now you're wondering how I can read your mind. I can't. Not exactly. Your anger betrays your thoughts. And I think that Star Wars Explained had mentioned this in their review video that came out earlier about how this line, it really harkens back to what Qimir tells Sol last week of, you know, Sol says he would never attack someone unarmed, which Osha also says this week too. But Qimir says, rules, rules, rules. If you never follow any, you never have to break any. And this kind of, Star Wars Explained drew a parallel to this line here of heat of battle, it's justified, but a few hours later, it's vengeance. And how this is literally all semantics, what you're talking about. Like, I'm still to Qimir, I think what he would say is, I'm still the villain. I'm the villain now in this moment of vulnerability, and I'm the villain when I, you know, killed all of your friends. But you're going to draw this line about when it's morally acceptable for you to kill me then, but not now, because there's some rule from the Jedi about, you can't attack someone who's unarmed. And I thought that was a good parallel to make, because he talks about semantics later on about the dark side and tapping into the Force and things like that. And I think that's going to be a part of his teachings to Osha about what you should and shouldn't need to follow in order to exist in the galaxy. And I think for Qimir it would be, I don't need to follow any rules. I am my own. I am in charge of me, and no one else should have a say in what I get to do.
There's also a real sense of loneliness that I sense from Qimir that's really alluring. Because I think when he says, I've already mentioned this, when he says like, I want a pupil, it must be so nice to have a master and an apprentice. He's like jealous of the relationship between Osha and Sol. He points out later when they're walking back together, Osha says, if you keep me here, Sol comes to you. He's found me before. His strength in the Force is very powerful. And then Qimir kind of pauses and says, you think that's his strength? That's your strength in the Force, Osha. Someone ought to teach you that. He really is like stroking Osha's ego and being like, it's her power. It's your power that's interesting. I'm interested in your power. And it must be nice to have a relationship that you like look up to someone in that way, but you need to recognize that in yourself, and I can help you recognize that in yourself.
Yeah, I think there's something genuine about Qimir wanting Osha to tap into her own power for herself.
Exactly.
Especially at the very end, as far as the mask goes. And he's like, put it on. She's like, I don't trust you. And he says, yeah, you shouldn't, but you should trust yourself. And I think that's part of his corruption is really like her own unmasking, which is ironic because she puts the mask on, but her own unmasking of the reality of the Jedi and who they are, how she left, which we'll continue to talk about. I did want to kind of go back to this, to the outfits and kind of what they're wearing. We've already talked a little bit about the white billowy shirt giving Darcy. Their outfits, again, we're going to be talking about The Last Jedi a lot because it's so it's so clear. But Osha's outfit in here is a whole other version of Rey's outfit in The Last Jedi. Osha's could have been concept art for Rey's in The Last Jedi. Like, they're so similar. And the fact
I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't be surprised if Osha's outfit here was some concept art or version of Rey's from The Last Jedi that, got changed for her in the film, because they're so similar. And again, we said this, but the silhouette of Qimir's with the white shirt and the pants, it's very similar to Kylo's that he wears after he's been redeemed as Ben Solo. And I think that this is all a repeat of The Last Jedi and Rey's journey on Ahch-To, and now we have Osha's here on this unknown planet. And part of Rey's journey on Ahch-To was to find herself. It was about seeing another side of Kylo, which happened when he was shirtless, and it was part of her gaining compassion for what happened to him in the past, of being betrayed by his master, of her learning the truth, the other sides of the Rashomon story of what happened between Kylo and Luke in the past. And she goes into a cave on The Last Jedi. Osha is in a cave as well here. They both go into the cave to find out something about themselves. And the fact that Osha puts on the mask inside the cave, just like Rey has a reckoning with her past in the cave, they're dressed the same. It's the same environment. It's the same unmasking and undressing of the villain. It just, it's all right there. And I'm so excited to see what's going to be happening next with these. To go back to our Phantom of the Opera discussion, in Phantom of the Opera, the Phantom reveals and undresses himself as well when the mask is removed. We've already talked, the reveal of Anakin at the end of Return of the Jedi is shocking to see who's actually under the mask. The reveal of Kylo to Rey in The Force Awakens is also played up with sexual tension. J.J. Abrams describes him as the Dark Prince in The Force Awakens. And Rian Johnson, as we already said, is also playing with this concept of being stripped down quite literally to evoke vulnerability and compassion in The Last Jedi. And Rey can't handle it. She, as we mentioned, she says, can you put a cowl on or something? Osha doesn't need to say that, and I'm proud of her for that. You go, girl. But it really is about seduction and temptation, and what is Osha going to do with it as she is leaning into it, which she very much is by the end. StarWars.com did an interview with Manny and Leslye that I think we've already referenced, but they talk about this a little, and Manny says that there's more to the stranger to unpack as the series continues. He says, quote, how does one get seduced by the dark side? I was very intrigued by that when Headland mentioned that. It's such an interesting concept because with seduction, you have empathy and vulnerability. And that was really appealing to me because we never really see that in the Sith or in the dark side. It was a lot to explore. I think we could probably unpack if we've never actually seen that with the Sith or the dark side. But again, the fact that he uses that word seduction, Leslye also mentioned in, was it the inverse article, that word seduced by the dark side was really inspiring, and she latched onto that word seduced, and we're fully seeing it play out here. And I think it's, like I said, I think that the fact that Osha's journey is so parallel to Rey throughout Teach/Corrupt, we have to start thinking about why they're making such strong parallels. And it's because Rey is discovering more about herself and more about Kylo and the partnership that they could have in the future. And it's on Octo when she touches Kylo's hand that she sees this new future for him and for herself. And I think that that is part of what Osha is discovering here. I think we can speculate a lot about if she'll fully follow Qimir down the dark side. I'm here for it. I'm so ready for it. You guys know that. But they're doing similar things. They're having similar introspective moments with these dark side characters that are actively seducing them.
Yeah, you're so right in that. It's so exciting, isn't it? Like we are getting a different perspective of what we explored in The Last Jedi in a little bit of it's a different spin. These two characters are different. I want to make that very clear. And you just did too, that while we're exploring different parts of who they are, their own power and things like that, we're approaching it from different ways, but through the lens of like what we know before. It really feels very Star Wars that we're doing this, that it's the poetry, it rhymes, and it's just different perspectives of ways to approach it, the seduction of the dark side. And I think it also has to do more with, if we want to continue to compare between Rey and Kylo, what we discovered in The Rise of Skywalker is that Rey and Kylo are dyads, right? They're both a dyad in the Force, and we didn't really previously know that before. We just knew there was something powerful in their connection. And instead, at the very end of The Rise of Skywalker, when Ben comes to rescue Rey on Exegol, and Palpatine has them both side by side and is sort of sucking the life force out of them, he says a dyad in the Force as his like hands are coming back together, and he's really sucking the life force out of them, like I just said, and it's fueling him in his own rebirth. And he says, a dyad in the Force, unseen for generations. Now the power of two restores the one true emperor. Later we see Qimir say that he's interested in the power of two. We now have the song that is the power of two. If you guys haven't listened to that song that Star Wars put out, it's so good and it's interesting. It's kind of fun to dig into. And I feel like we're going to dig into it by the end of the series. I'm not prepared yet to dig into it now. But with each week, I'm like, ooh, this song gets more and more interesting. Qimir is interested in the power too. I think that through Star Wars, we are thinking about the like logistics of that. How does that inform power? What does this mean in terms of the dark side or the light side? I don't think that the dyad was never a dark side thing or a light side thing. It was just a Force thing. And I think Qimir is clearly interested in that as well. I don't know if the dyad equals the power of two or if those things are different. Are we exploring that in the series? Unsure. I think it's just interesting that the words power of two were brought up in The Rise of Skywalker, especially when we're talking about the life force being sucked out of two people and fueling another who definitely should have been dead by this point, right?
Yeah, I think that like drawing these comparisons, you had said this, but that all of our characters here are very different. Like even if we're drawing these really intense parallels between Rey and Osha and Kylo and Qimir, they're all extremely different characters. Like even you talking about the end of The Rise of Skywalker when when Ben Solo is coming up and gives his life force to Rey to save her. As you were talking, I was like, I don't think I could see Qimir doing that at this juncture. Even if they enter into a fully romantic relationship, it feels so different. I'm not even really thinking about Qimir on the light side the way that we did with Ben Solo. And I think that's all part of this setup of him. I feel like Kylo accidentally seduced Rey. I think he just wanted a partner. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But he wasn't trying to seduce her necessarily. Whereas I think Qimir obviously is.
Yeah.
he's in full seduction mode. So that doesn't really have a connection in the larger conversation. I was just thinking of it while you were talking about all of this and the power of two. Even when he said that, right, we have the rule of two with the Sith, the power of two, the dyad. We've got our twins here. There's so much to consider about what this could actually mean for all of our characters by the end of the series. And I'll also say that when Qimir said that what he wants is the power of two, to me that sounded very different than him saying last week, I want a pupil. To me, and you had kind of mentioned this earlier, Charlotte, of the power of two sounds more like a partnership. Whereas what he said to Sol last week was, I want a pupil. And those could be the same. The rule of two sets it up as a master and apprentice, that there can only be two Sith. So it would be a master and a pupil. So maybe the power of two means the same thing to Qimir. But the way that he is approaching things with Osha feels way more like a partnership than a master and pupil. That still has yet to be determined. It could be more clear next week that he does mean pupil. But from this week, I was like, oh, they're partners.
If he wanted an apprentice, he could have just said apprentice. It's so specific when we're talking about our Star Wars vernacular to not say apprentice here.
Yeah.
To say pupil feels like I want an equal. I want a friend. I want a partner.
Pupil is a student. He could say
pupil is a student, but it's different than an apprentice.
Pupil to me sounds younger than an apprentice.
Really?
Yeah. To me, it's like a pupil to me sounds like elementary school. And then an apprentice to me sounds like high school.
I guess that's true.
And you could have said colleague. I would like a colleague. I would like a cohort.
I mean, sure. I just feel like it feels so specific. It's just different. And I think that Acolyte is also a piece of new terminology. I'm not saying that they can't introduce this. It feels so specific and different than what we're used to. And it's very cool.
Yeah, I'm all here for the different terminology. That's part of expanding the universe. You know what I mean? It's just now we get to speculate about if it is something entirely different from how we generally talk about and perceive an apprentice, or if it is just a new term that they can be using in Star Wars to describe an apprentice, right?
Yeah.
All right. So the next scene we have is May and Sol on the ship, and Sol comes back up from resetting the Wi-Fi, and he gives May this huge hug, pulls her into this really intense hug. And he says, you saved us, Osha. You saved me. That man, he corrupted your sister. He pushed me to a place I'm sorry. It's time to make things right. It's time to face the High Council, to tell them everything. And May responds back, everything? And this was a great scene. I think we had talked about last week of May kind of coming to some realizations, to some acceptances about Sol in the same way that Osha would about Qimir. And I think in this conversation and then in the next one, you had put in our notes, we can see May being lured by the truth that Sol holds. And I think that's a great way to describe it, because she's kind of shocked by the hug, I think, at first. But then when he says he's going to tell the truth and go to the High Council, these are the exact words that she said to Master Torben on Olega at the beginning of the series, of wanting him to go to the High Council to confess his sin. And that still is one of the standout sequences to me from the Acolyte, is May and Torben. And to have a kind of callback, I think, of confessing to the High Council, I thought was really specific here. And yeah, I thought this was a great scene. And again, I'm like, does Sol know at this point? I really can't decide.
I can't decide either. I think it's supposed to be purposely vague.
Yeah. The next scene that we have is Vernestra at the Jedi Council, and Sol is going through it. Vernestra is also really going through it. Our girl is
really stressed.
Is so stressed.
She's so stressed. I feel like she has like and I mean this lovingly, like permanent scowl, because she's just like is the keeper of this like secret mission now that has clearly gone really wrong. Then it's interesting though, because how we come upon the scene is Vernestra is within like a meeting that's on a holo. It's sort of vague. It talks about, I think the quote that you have here is, Senator Raincourt continues to gain support. My colleagues in the expansion region will vote in favor of an external review of the order. Raincourt has never been a friend of the Jedi. I worry his fear has convinced so many. A review should not be a cause for alarm. The Jedi are always transparent with the Senate. Okay, the irony. I feel like talking about the Jedi's relationship with the Senate is just like very Revenge of the Sith coded. and is just sort of cause for alarm, I guess, in terms of this is not exactly what, I don't know. It's sort of, we're entering in on clearly a conflict between the Jedi and the Senate and a review. And what we're dealing with Vernestra is the fact that she's holding a secret of a secret mission that went wrong.
She doesn't even know that at this point.
She doesn't,
Yeah.
but the Jedi are not transparent
Yeah.
at this point. That's the whole thing. They're not going to be transparent. There's going to be a cover-up of some sort of what happened on Khofar. They're not going to be transparent about what happened on Khofar. I think this is a huge reason as to why Coyote-Mundi later says the Sith have been extinct for a millennia, because Vernestra is stressed about what this means.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Vernestra once she actually gets on Khofar. But yeah, this was just another one of those instances that we've been talking about all season of the connection between the Jedi and the Republic, and the fact that they're having this outside, an external review of the Order, right? An audit. And meanwhile, Vernestra is holding this huge secret about this person who's on the loose killing Jedi. But little does she know that it's gotten so much worse since the last time she checked in. And we see Mog, which is the guy who comes in and tells Vernestra that it seems like things have gotten bad with Sol. And Vernestra says, we're going to Khofar. And Mog is like, how do you know where they are? And Vernestra's like, well, I'm the one that sent them there, right? So there's a lot that's being kept under wraps. And I think we should also note, just as a reminder, that I think it was last week or the week before, when Vernestra, when they're in the lower council, when she actively tells all of the Jedi there that they don't need to involve the High Council at this time. So she's really trying to keep things under wraps. And like we said, our girl is stressed. The next scene we have is Osha and Qimir walking back from the lake scene, and we find out that Qimir was actually a Jedi. And Osha says, I've never heard of you. And he says, it was a really long time ago. And there's a lot, I think, that this could mean. It could just mean I'm 15 years older than you. It could mean I'm immortal. I don't know. I told Charlotte my first thought, and I hate this. My first thought was the conversation in Twilight between Bella and Edward when she's finding out that he's a vampire. And she's like,
how long have you been
17? How long have you been an ex-Jedi? That was literally my first thought.
Well, I think that's why I brought up the whole power of two life force thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I don't really know if that relates at all. But if Qimir is like super old somehow, I feel like the only reason he is super old is probably because of some force power, some dark force, some like potentially what Palpatine was mentioning to Anakin in Revenge of the Sith about Plagueis, the power to save people from death, things like that. Like, are we going back to that? Something we've discussed on this podcast already with regards to the show. So it was an interesting line. I feel like given the fact that Osha was older when she joined the Jedi, it doesn't mean that like they couldn't have overlapped or anything like that. If she was, how old was she when she joined the Jedi? Like 9 or 10? Yeah. Like Anakin. I feel like if he's like 10 years older than her, like if he is 10 years older than her legitimately, then there's a chance they wouldn't have overlapped, because who knows what happened to him when he was a Padawan or something. And maybe that's why he's saying it was a really long time ago. But this seems very pointed, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some magic going on.
Well, even thinking about the magic and the life force of it all, if you remember a couple weeks ago to May, when they're talking about their deals with the Master, Qimir says, I don't have a deal with him. You know how he collects people. I haven't seen any other people. Who else is he collecting?
Right.
Are they all dead because he sucked up their life force?
Is Qimir the Master, or is Qimir the apprentice?
I don't know. So I think there's still some question marks here, but I love the idea that it's like, oh, we weren't in school at the same time, or I'm immortal and taking people's life force.
Yeah. If he really is taking people's life force, then there is no better metaphor than the vampire and the vampire lair and the comparison to Edward Cullen.
So you're saying it's a good Twilight comparison?
I actually do think it is, because Twilight, if anything, is a reference of dozens, if not hundreds, of vampire novels that came before it.
Monster romance.
The whole monster romances. It's actually quite literally in the text that it's referenced.
Yeah.
And what Stephenie Meyer did in that book is combine a lot of elements from different vampire stories into one. But what it really always comes down to is immortal life force and sucking blood in order to, continue to live. And so that is Dracula. So I do think it's very vampire. Even the fact that like the way that Qimir floated down too is almost like a bat in this weird way. And even when he was carried away by the moths, it's like he was flying. It's similar. I don't know. You can really go into that imagery if you wanted to.
Clearly we do. So The next thing that Qimir says, another kind of moment of sexual tension he says, everyone does seem to want you, when Osha is saying that Sol would come for her and Qimir would use her as leverage to get to Sol. And he says, everyone does seem to want you. And I'm like, yeah, including you, Qimir? All right. And then you had already talked about this, but this moment where Osha says his strength in the Force, Sol's, is very powerful, so he'll be able to find me. And Qimir says, you think that's his strength? That's your strength in the Force, Osha. Someone ought to teach you that. And this line feels really important to me because in The Rise of Skywalker, Kylo says to Rey, you don't just have power, you have his power, referring to Palpatine, because Rey is a descendant/clone of Emperor Palpatine. And so it's Palpatine's power that she has. And that's always been one of the things, actually the thing I would say in The Rise of Skywalker that just has never, I don't know, it felt like taking away something from Rey by giving her power to this old man in Palpatine, right? I know you feel the same way. So having this be flipped of that's not your master's strength, that's your strength in the Force, I was like, yeah, yes, sign me up. Qimir has never done anything wrong. This is so important to me for him to be pointing out that it's her strength, it's not anyone else's. And we've seen that Sol in particular seems to have a lot of tendency to be able to sense things from people. So I think it could make sense that him being able to find Osha in the past and in the future episodes could be tied to the fact that he's sensing her in the Force, and that's how strong she is, even if she doesn't feel like she's being able to tap into it. That aura, that Force sensitivity is still surrounding her. And I think that you could really see in this moment Osha taking that in and kind of taking it in that it's her power actually, because later when she says that she essentially failed out of the Jedi Order, I think it would be surprising for her to think of herself as a person who is really strong in the Force. And anyway, I really loved that Qimir made it a point to say that it was her power that was tangible, that was visible in the Force, and that it was stronger than Sol's perhaps.
And then he goes on to say that the Jedi teach there's only one way to access the Force, and if you don't do it their way, it fades. But there is another way. Below the surface of consciousness are powerful emotions: anger, fear, loss, desire. And I feel like from that point on, when he says semantics, when, Osha points out that that's the path to the dark side, the fact that he says desire is just like, whoa.
Like, turn on the fan.
I know. Later, when Qimir is kind of talking about the Jedi and like sort of the Jedi's wrongs, he says, why do you love people who can only go so far, who can't go as deep as you can? And it really is him saying, why do you love people, the Jedi, who can't love you back? Because they have these rules, they have these attachment fears that they can't go that far, that they can't give people what they need. And I just think I'm just such a broken record about this, but there's a lot of things that I think Leslye Headland is going at, and I think are Jedi taken when they're too young? What is the deal with the Jedi Order and that whole thing about you're trained too young, or you're too old to train. You're too old to train, but clearly old enough to like go into battle. And then on the next hand is, how can the show interrogate the fact that the Jedi are anti-attachment. And I think when they say that, they mean anti-obsession that leads to anger and fear and loss, right? But they're anti-attachment to a fault that they don't accept love in, potentially. And as we know, Star Wars is about love, because the reason why Anakin was able to come back from the dark side is the love of his son and his daughter too. And I feel like the Star Wars at its core is that. So interrogating that here is interesting, because I think it's worth interrogating because of the systems that are in place that allow Anakin to fall to the dark side when he's not able to go as deep as he wants to. I think this verbiage is really interesting, but I think it just makes sense for a character to like point blank say this, especially a character like Osha, who later, when Sol is talking about Pip to May, thinking that it is Osha, he says something along the lines of like, you love that droid even though it's just a machine. And he uses the word love, and it's respectful in the way that he says that. Like, I see the way you go about your life, like you give things that are even just machines love. And so when Qimir is interrogating Osha here about why do you give love to people who can't give you anything back, I think it's interesting because that's selfless, right? That's what Osha's doing. But it is also like, what is the end goal then? And it's sort of valid. It's interesting for a character like this to explore this in Star Wars.
Yeah, it definitely reminded me of what May said last week to Osha as well, that her life with the Jedi brought her nowhere. May said, what have they given you? A life without purpose, without love, family. He led you nowhere, as in Sol led Osha nowhere. And like we said last week, that's kind of true. She is in this place working as a mechanic, kind of in limbo, it feels like. And, she's reconnecting with the Jedi throughout the series. And it's clear that Sol has emotional attachment to her. But as we saw earlier, it can only ever go so far. And isn't that, yes, it's selfless to love people. The Jedi would say it's selfless to have compassion for people, and that's just another type of love too. But there's also the human need to be loved back as well, and to give in to that desire to fully feel anger and loss and desire and seduction and temptation and all of that. And I thought this was a really great point from Qimir, and really kind of calling Osha out of, these people could only ever be with you, love you, care about you to a certain extent. It's never going, like you said, it's never going to go as deep as you can, because you're not a Jedi. And it's because of these darker emotions that you have, that he kind of tries to pull out in the next scene, that she can never be fully belonging to the Jedi. I wanted to say, while you were talking, I was really thinking about the verbiage that Qimir uses of below the surface of consciousness are powerful emotions, and that phrase of below the surface really reminded me of the ocean. And this was a conversation we had in the very first premiere of the Acolyte. I think it's in the first week, where Sol is having that lesson with all the younglings, and they talk about how they view the Force. And we hear them talk about the ocean, and then the one kid talks about the fire and how fire seems more dangerous. But you and I had a conversation about how the ocean is actually perhaps even darker and more dangerous than a fire. A fire is, what it is. There's no secrets about what a fire is going to do. But an ocean, what's below the surface, holds a lot of secrets, a lot of depth, really. And so below the surface of consciousness, in this ocean of the Force surrounding someone like Osha, there are all of these emotions that are down there and bubbling to the surface. And I don't know, it just made me think of that conversation of how the water feels safer, kinder than the fire. But is that true? I don't think it is necessarily. And just that word choice of below the surface, and can't go as deep as you, like deeper into the water, to the trenches of the sea. All of that imagery was kind of playing with me.
Yeah, and I think then the next piece of that is the fact that the helmet is a sensory deprivation headpiece.
Yeah.
So, in terms of going into the subconscious, what better place to do that than using a sensory deprivation headpiece?
I'm so obsessed.
I know, me too. I really am so obsessed. And the fact that there's a Jedi training parallel to it too, I guess
Mhm.
that is part of it, is so freaking cool. And the fact that that was alluring to Osha towards the very end, I think really speaks to this conversation that is happening right here in the scene.
Yeah, I agree. So the next part of the scene after they have this conversation about desire is Osha leaves or pretends like she's gonna leave. And Qimir comes out. She's still holding the lightsaber and tells Osha to do it, to kill him. That's why she's here, really. She should do it while she's here. And then they have that this great angry conversation of Qimir really kind of pulling at the pain in Osha's life about not being a Jedi. And he's really trying to bring that to the surface. He says, "Why do you still think of yourself as a Jedi? They didn't want you." And she said, "That's not true. I left." "Why?" "Because I chose to." "Are you sure about that?" "Let me go. What you're feeling right now, this anger, this pain, this is who you are. The Jedi saw it, and that's why they threw you away." She said, "They didn't throw me away." And he says, "Then why aren't you a Jedi? Why aren't you a Jedi, Osha?" And she says, "It's because I failed." And that's when she ignites the red lightsaber and pushes Qimir to the wall. And this to me was the other huge parallel to Rey and Kylo. We have kind of almost the exact same conversation that Rey and Kylo have in The Last Jedi. Kylo says, "Your parents threw you away like garbage, yet you can't stop needing them. It's your greatest weakness. Looking for them everywhere in Han Solo, now in Skywalker. Did he tell you what happened that night?" You could take this conversation and just switch in Sol and Brendok. The Jedi threw you away like garbage, yet you can't stop needing them. It's your greatest weakness. Looking for them everywhere in Sol. Did he tell you about what happened that night on Brendok? It I was like,
It's the same.
it's the same. And that's the truth, is that Rey in that moment didn't know what really happened that night to Kylo, just the way that Osha does not really know what Sol did on Brendok. And even using this verbiage of "they threw you away," the same verbiage that Kylo uses it twice in The Last Jedi as well. And again, this scene is happening on Ahch-To, the same environment that we're seeing here in The Acolyte, right? You have to be thinking about why they're making these the same so explicitly. But this scene I feel like is the one that I keep coming back to, honestly, especially with like the gifts and everything online. But after she's got the lightsaber to his throat, he says, "I understand. I lost everything, Osha. But when you lose everything, that's when you're finally free." And we see his hand just come up to her arm in a very gentle way. Osha has kind of been avoiding his eyes as he's saying all of this, but then at the end, she's finally able to make eye contact with him. Definitely looks like she's looking at his mouth to me in this scene, but the lightsaber
Mhm.
is also right there. So, but
Yeah.
again, there's that seduction, that temptation, and now he's appealing to her emotions of the truth that she failed being a Jedi. Still questions there, right, as to the specifics of what happened. But Qimir doesn't need the specifics in order to continue to seduce Osha. He's there. He's got it. And now he's appealing to her in that they are the same, and that he failed as well, or was failed by someone in the Jedi. Like he says later, someone who threw him away. And he is now on this new path, and he can show her how to connect to the Force again and lean into her own strength.
I knew we were going to find out the reason why Osha left the Jedi Order in some way. We still didn't really fully find it out, but we did find out that she thinks that she failed at something. And I feel like it's probably she failed at letting go of her mourning of her family, if I could make a guess. And maybe that led her down a path similarly that she's going down now before stopping herself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, who knows? I don't know yet, but I was on the edge of my seat during the scene, thinking that we were going to get more information here. And just the fact that this is the situation in which we found out about Osha's past with the Jedi and leaving the Jedi, I couldn't have expected or wanted anything better. It's really, really great.
Well, the thing is that Luke, when in The Last Jedi, when Luke Skywalker finally tells Rey the fuller truth of what happened between him and Kylo, when Kylo was a child, he says that he saw darkness in Kylo, and it led him to ignite his lightsaber. And so again, even now here in the past, Qimir says, your anger and pain, your darkness, that's what the Jedi saw as well. And that's why they threw you away. And goes back to him saying, I've accepted my darkness. What have you done with yours? And that there is truth in having to accept the darker parts of yourself, of knowing what is beneath the surface of your own consciousness. And in the real world, the appropriate ways to work through those very real emotions.
Yep.
Oh boy. So we did skip over the scene, a very lighthearted scene where May and Basil and Pip kind of have it out. And I just thought this was so funny. Basil low-key kicking her, and when May screams when she gets hit in the eye.
It was so funny. The way that he was like doing these like kung fu moves too
like,
before he
what's
goes up and
happening?
kicks her. It was so great. It does kind of remind me of like the Ewok in a little bit.
Yeah.
And I feel like this was a humorous moment.
It really
and
was.
really, I think the purpose of it, to be honest, to me, is if you had any sort of anti feelings towards May and like the deception that she's on the ship, she might kill Sol. This like softened her a little bit, because here we are kind of laughing at the hijinks that are happening. And it was great.
She did reset Pip to factory settings though. So
Yeah, that's annoying.
that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
We then get
It's okay. She can forge her own relationship with Pip.
Exactly. We then get the scene of Vernestra at the Jedi Order, where she's decided to go on the mission to handle things personally. This scene is a big callback to the High Republic books, where they reference that Vernestra essentially gets motion sick, or what she says is that she finds traveling through space to be unsettling. Again, that word unsettling. But in the books, she has visions in hyperspace sometimes. So that's part of why she doesn't love to travel through hyperspace. I think Charlotte and I are very behind on the High Republic books, and there's a lot I don't remember from the ones that we have read. But I think I also heard that she like can talk to dead people or ghosts or something like that in her visions as well. So definitely unsettling. The next scene that we get is back on the ship with Sol and May. We've already kind of touched on the lights coming on and off, the power coming on and off throughout. And this to me was also one of those really unsettling moments where we see Sol sitting in this cold, dark light on the bottom bunk. And when May comes in, I do think at this moment he knows it's May, right? Because the next scene is when he stuns her. But he says, how could I have not sensed that villain's true intentions when we first met him on Olega? And May responds, I think that when you really want something, it can cloud your mind. You see what you want to see. He fooled us all. And I really love this exchange because May is being genuine here with Sol. She was fooled as well. And this is something that they have in common. And I thought this was a great exchange and more of that connection growing between Sol and May.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this was a real moment that May has a realization that she has something in common there, that they have a lot of common ground. And I just think that's going to continue to grow. As we see it growing with Qimir and Osha, I feel like we're getting the same situation with Sol and May.
Yeah. This is also the part of the episode where we have the conversation of, again, Sol is just about to say what happened on Brendok in the past, and the lights come on and things have shifted again. This is when he stuns May. You can tell that she's angry that he's not ready to tell her the truth quite yet. And that's when it looks like she's going to go turn herself in, and Sol comes up and stuns her. What you said earlier about not knowing what he was going to do next, this was really surprising to me. But even more so than him stunning her was him turning off the transponder and leaving Khofar, because the Jedi on the hologram says, "Make sure to keep your location on," and he cuts it off, and
then jumps to hyperspace.
Yeah, it's like,
I was shocked, but I
you
think
going?
for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, so much is shifting with my perception of Sol.
Mhm.
And I think that I'm not saying he's gonna become a bad guy now. I just
No.
think that we're digging more and more into what we don't know about Sol, and that the situation that happened on Brendok, and the fact that now Sol is the sole survivor of the situation that happened on Brendok. Actually, May and Sol are. So I think they have something in common there where they can compare memories. And I
Mhm.
suppose that's going to happen next episode. But I think it's quite interesting how we're finally getting that side of Sol that is really ridden with guilt. We saw it in Master Torben, obviously, and we saw some craze happen with Kelnaka as well. We haven't seen it with Indara fully, but we could still in this flashback sequence. But I think that this guilt is really biting at Sol.
Fully. We do have the Jedi arrive on Khofar. It's kind of a short scene. And then we go back to our last scene between Osha and Qimir. And Qimir is fixing his helmet in a way that is very similar to the Japanese art style of kintsugi, which is the art of golden repair. And we spend a lot of time talking about kintsugi in the lead up to The Rise of Skywalker because Kylo's helmet with those red cracks through it, that's very similar to kintsugi. And if you don't know, like I said, it's a Japanese art. It's an ancient art where if a pot was broken or something, they would fix it and they would often glue it back together essentially with like gold leaf on the front so that you can see the cracks. And the metaphor being that things are not perfect, and to see the cracks, the scars in one's life is all a part of your journey through life in general, and that you shouldn't try to hide these things, that you can be proud of your scars, what you've made it through, and that the golden repair, that good can still come out of it, right? There's a lot more that we've talked about with kintsugi. We have a couple of episodes that reference it. I wrote on our website about it a couple years ago. It's a little outdated. It's all about Kylo, but the concepts, if you want to learn more about kintsugi itself, you can read some of it in that article that we'll have linked.
And we also have an audio podcast version of it too.
We do, yeah. It's one of the few episodes where it's just me, just one of us. But this is where we learn about about Qimir wanting the power of two, and we've kind of already talked about that. But then in another moment of seduction, Qimir lifts his shirt to, wipe the sweat off his brow, and very clearly showing off more of his scar. Again, he wants Osha to ask about it, and she does. And he says, someone who threw me away. He doesn't, and Osha says, your Jedi Master. He doesn't confirm that it's his Jedi Master, so could not be, but there's this long pause, this long stare between them. And I think Osha believes it was his Jedi Master. And she sounds genuinely concerned, right? The tone of her voice is shock of, no, a Jedi couldn't do that to you, especially if you were a youngling, an apprentice with them, right? And again, this just reminds me of when Rey finally confronts Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, and she says, did you create Kylo Ren? Because now she's heard Kylo's version of the story, and it has upended her understanding of Luke Skywalker as a hero. And she yells at him, did you create Kylo Ren? And I think that that's similar here with Osha of, like, was it your Jedi Master? And like I said, Osha sounds genuinely concerned in that last line. And it's part of that opening up, vulnerability, that connection, that temptation to fall into what Qimir is saying, because it is true, at least as far as we know. And I think it is true because Darksiders don't lie. But yeah, still some things to figure out, to piece together there, which I think we'll be getting hopefully in the next 2 episodes, which I think we will.
I think the concept of stabbing someone in the back, the way that she said, it's like someone stabbed you in the back, when it really does look like a whip mark. It doesn't necessarily look like a lightsaber, at least like it's not a single stroke of like a firm blade. I mean, it could be, but her saying someone stabbed you in the back is very pointed. It has a double meaning, obviously, meaning someone betrayed you. You were betrayed. I always never know. I'm just going to mention this. I don't remember if like stab in the back comes from Hamlet or not, with Polonius dying behind the curtain, or if that's just like a normal thing that people say and have said forever.
It does feel like Hamlet, but I can't tell you the last time I read Hamlet. So,
well, I never know if like Shakespeare invented that or not,
yeah.
Which is like a very common thing that obviously Shakespeare did for so many words, so many sayings too, that you might not even remember. But Basically the point is like, okay, he was stabbed by an enemy. Someone betrayed him. Maybe he was somewhere where he shouldn't have been, and someone's anger got the best of them. That's sort of what is implied there.
Yeah, definitely. We've already touched a little bit on this, but this is the scene where they bring up the Cortosis helmet and they clarify that, yes, it is Cortosis, which I think StarWars.com did last week as well, but we get a direct mention of it here from Qimir. And like we said, it's the sensory deprivation headpiece. And he says that it's like what we use as younglings, which was such a we did already talk about this, but this connection between training they would have done as younglings in the Jedi Temple. It's that infamous scene from A New Hope where Luke is training with the lightsaber.
Blast shield down.
What's the
Can't
thing
see
called?
a thing.
With the training droid. And yeah, he says, I can't see anything with the blast shield down. And Obi-Wan is telling him, to use the Force. And that's such like a kind of cute introduction to some of the training that the Jedi would have gone through. We've seen it a number of times. We just recently saw it as well in the Ahsoka live action show too, where Sabine has a similar feeling of, I can't see anything with the blast shield down. But to have it amped up so many notches here to be Qimir, the stranger's helmet, this like root of evil, is so fascinating. I love seeing it in a different light here. I will say this whole scene of her putting on the helmet later on really reminded me of Kanan Jarrus from Star Wars Rebels, the animated show. And when he is blinded by Darth Maul in that show, he then has to kind of relearn how to fight as a Jedi without his vision. And he wears a helmet at that point in the show that covers his entire face covers the top half of his face. And, obviously he can't see. So it's very similar to what is happening here in this helmet, the Cortosis helmet. And yeah, this idea of just kind of letting go of everything else, that your vision is only one of your senses. And that was kind of the lesson that Kanan had to learn in Star Wars Rebels. And I really love the fact that we've been talking about Osha and her relationship to the Force and how we haven't really seen it. In the very first episode, she can't use the Force to grab Pip. And, when is it finally going to come that she's using the Force? And the fact that the first time we see her use a lightsaber, and now I assume when she's going to start reconnecting to the Force, is here with Qimir, this dark sider. It's truly delicious. I don't know how else to say it. It's delicious and I love it.
Me too. Me too. It's so great.
Yeah.
And, in this point in the scene, he's kind of saying, he's welcoming her to put it on. She hasn't yet. She does later when she's alone. But him diligently working on the helmet and sort of sharing its importance to him, I don't know. I just think it's kind of interesting.
It is.
I also think that the discussion over the fact that it is sensory deprivation, I don't think that the Jedi shield is like as intense as this in terms of. I don't even think I would have said that the Jedi training shield is sensory deprivation. I think it is, because your senses are deprived.
They're dampened.
They're dampened just based off of your eyes, and you can't see. You act on instinct. That's what Ben Kenobi says, right? But I think for some reason there's something more sinister here about it, or like darker and more interesting when it's a sensory deprivation helmet. It reminds me of a sensory deprivation tank, which has like sort of a hallucinogenic attribute to it in a lot of ways, especially in like modern use. We're supposed to meditate within it and things like that.
Totally. I've done them before.
I know. I was waiting for you to bring it up.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to tell people.
No, I've done them before. Only a couple times. There was a place that had them not far from my apartment in Atlanta. And I did like an intro pack of like 3 or 4 sessions. It was too expensive for me to keep it up, but I really enjoyed it. You really do just kind of feel like nothing eventually. The whole point of the sensory deprivation tank, if you were to go and do one, IRL, is that you're in water, in salt water that is body temperature. Everything is body temperature, the temperature in the room, in the water, yourself, obviously. So then you can't tell where you begin and the water ends. And if you're meditating and you get like so still, the salt water is keeping you afloat as well. So you don't even feel like you're not sitting on the bottom of the tank. You're floating in nothingness, and it's completely pitch black. It's your senses are fully deprived. It's a very cool experience. I definitely recommend it if you've never done it.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of, and obviously this is different. This is like a single helmet, not water bound or anything like that.
Right.
But I think it does remind me of the first season of Stranger Things when they have 11 go in. I know you haven't watched Stranger Things, but I'm sure a lot of people have listened who have. They have 11 go into a separate sensory deprivation tank so that she can access like the other world, the Upside Down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is important for me to note because I think this is a big part of how the stranger probably accesses the Force in order to get into people's minds. And we saw that in the last episode with like the helmet coming like straight in front of, I can't remember if it's May or Osha's face when they're running.
May.
It's May, yeah. May's face when they're running, and he's sort of like chiding her. And I think that's probably like a key to his power in order to do that, to like do this reverse Jedi mind trick because of the sensory deprivation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very cool, and I'm excited to see Osha in the helmet and see what comes of it. Our next scene is finally when we get a little bit more from Vernestra on Khofar. We are assaulted, quite honestly, with more images of Jackie and Yord, which just made me very, very sad. I miss them so much. But this is when we finally get to see Vernestra's light whip in action when she's talking to Mog about, who could have done this? And she tells Mog, what do you see? And he's describing the scene in front of them of, it's clear there was an explosion, which we talked a little bit about this too with the dust and the red last week of it's kind of like a scar on the land of what happened. And I think that's kind of what the Jedi are using it for here. And they begin to talk about how these are all lightsaber wounds. So it's someone who was trained in the Force. And I don't know. To me, it feels like Vernestra was kind of tensing up in all of this. Clearly, she's upset about the loss of all of these team members. They don't know where Sol is at this point. They don't know where May and Osha are. And Vernestra knows that May has a master. So it's clear through the wreckage, the aftermath of what they're seeing here on Khofar, that it truly is someone who is trained in the Force and has a lightsaber. And there is a theory going around that Vernestra was actually Qimir's master because the scar on Qimir's back looks like it could have come from a light whip. It does have that kind of cauterized scarring that we see with lightsabers because they are hot, right? They're a laser. And that's kind of the theory that's going around right now. And I think it's pointed that this is the first time that we've seen Vernestra's light whip used. They used it in promo.
Just one time too.
Yeah, and it's not even really that intense, right? She just kills one of those bug creatures again. And then
but really quickly. It's sort of like it's a violent, she doesn't look behind her type situation.
Yeah. And it's so kind of casual how she uses it. So I think it's, like I said, I think it's pointed that it would be that if this is true, that this would be the first time we see her use it. And it's so kind of easy how she's able to wield it. And then we have this huge scar that has been left on Qimir's back. And of course, we don't know the situation that could have happened in, why it could have happened, if Vernestra saw darkness in Qimir, like how Qimir says the Jedi saw darkness in Osha, or if it was something Qimir was right, there's still so much we don't know. But I don't know. I'm kind of running with the theory right now. And
well, it's also interesting because Vernestra's like super old.
Yeah.
Her species doesn't age like a human. I think it was a surprise that she was in the show. And she's the only High Republic character from the books and the comics that is in the show. And why else is she in the show? I don't think that it's only fan service in terms of connectivity to the High Republic. If they wanted to further connect it to the media initiative of the High Republic, then they could spin this a little bit to make her character a little bit more complicated by having a Padawan. We don't know that at this point in where we are in the books of the High Republic, because they're still publishing. If I think this goes back to our earlier discussion about if Qimir is super old and also Vernestra is super old.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of like question marks there in terms of what is Chimir's actual age, if we want to read into that a very long time ago comment at all. And then we see the scar. There's a lot of things that could add up to that, and I think that's purposeful. Also, we only have 2 more episodes left after this. If it's not something like that, I don't know what it would be. But it also could be something different, I guess, too.
Yeah, I agree. I will say that last week when Qimir is unmasked and he says to Sol, "You don't remember me," my first thought, honestly, at the time was, "Oh, he knows Sol from a long time ago." And my brain had kind of forgotten that they had met on Olega, like it short circuited. But once I was watching it, I was like, "Oh, he must mean when they met on Olega."
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of like, oh, maybe
Could
it
be
could
double
be
meaning.
both, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just thought you could interpret it a different way now. And so in the conversation with Mog, Mog says, "Who would possess the power to slay such a strong group?" And Vernestra says, almost to herself, something to tip the scales. And in this whole theory, this speculation of Vernestra being Chimir's master, who perhaps did something horrible to him that pushed him out, it would all kind of line up with how Vernestra is going to such great lengths to keep everything that has been happening between May and Osha and Sol and that mission and all of it under wraps, because perhaps she has actually been suspicious that it's Qimir this whole time. And all of this has to stay hidden and out of the public, because it's not just the Jedi's dark secret, it's her dark secret specifically. And
It's everyone that was involved.
yeah.
Like somehow she's also involved in this
Yeah.
because she knows him, and all the Jedi that were involved at what happened on Brendok are getting picked off one by one,
Mhm.
and it's all relative to each other in this mystery.
It kind of reminded me of Sol's first conversation with Vernestra about when she comes to tell him that they suspect it's Osha who killed Indara, and Sol insists that he's the one to bring her in because he trained her, that he feels this responsibility as her former Jedi master to go out and talk to Osha. And of course, we see that when he does finally meet up with Osha, he believes her kind of instantly that she didn't actually commit this murder. And there's an interesting parallel if similarly Vernestra had a pupil, an apprentice who went to the dark side or simply left the Jedi Order and now was also accused of something horrible, to the nth degree of being the dark side master that has been puppeteering all of this that is happening with May and Osha, and that maybe she didn't feel like she was able to go after him after whatever happened to cause him to leave the Jedi Order. You know what I mean? So the fact that they could have both had these apprentices that fell, or rather left the Jedi Order, because Osha didn't really fall when she left the Jedi Order, not that we really know of quite yet. But I thought that will be an interesting connection between Vernestra and Sol if this turns out to be true. All right, after this, we finally get the scene of May waking up in probably one of the most unsettling scenes the most unsettling scene we've seen with Sol so far, of her tied up on the bed, that she is actually the prisoner here. And Sol has just been waiting for her to wake up at the table across the room from her bed. It's so eerie. And when he says, "I have no intention of harming you, May. Then let me go. I will. Believe me. We have a lot to do. We need to find your master. We need to save Osha. But first, you and I are going to talk. I've had 16 years to think about what I would say to you if I ever got the opportunity. So you're going to listen." That, him saying we have a lot to do, it feels so much like a villain monologue. You know what I mean? Of like, you and I need you to go and do this thing. And we're going to go do it together, right? The villain is always monologuing after he's tied up the hero. And it did feel quite, like I said, scary, unsettling of him kind of insisting that they were going to go on this next part of the journey together of finding Qimir, of saving Osha, and all of this. I've heard people speculate that him saying, "I've had 16 years to think about what I would say to you," implies that he kind of believed that she, or knew that she was actually alive this whole time, and wondered if he would be able to confront her. You had said this earlier.
I sort of wonder if he convinced himself that she died, that there was no way to save her, even though he knew deep down that wasn't true. It's probably not true. And it obviously wasn't true. We don't know what actually happened that night from Sol's perspective and from May's perspective. I expect us to get that next episode, but yeah.
Yep, it was kind of a chilling scene, I'll be honest. And this is more when we have that kind of cold and unforgiving light is pretty prevalent here in this setup as well. So, yeah, it's been definitely the biggest tease of what actually happened on Brendok. We've had so many times of Sol getting ready to tell the truth, and then he doesn't. So, honestly, I've got a lot of expectations for what we're going to find out in the next flashback. And next week is episode 7, which is also directed by Kogonada, who directed the first flashback episode. So kind of makes sense that that would be the next one as well.
Yeah, totally.
And in our last scenes, this is when we have Osha put on the helmet, which we've already kind of talked about a little bit. One thing we haven't talked about is the fact that she sees what looks like a vein of Cortosis in the rock face. And in the background of the sound mix, to me, it sounded like we heard clanging of metal and things like that. And to me, I kind of wondered if that was a bit of foreshadowing about her making her own helmet of Cortosis eventually here on the island with Qimir. And like I said, it's so delicious. It's so delicious to have her put on the helmet, because in The Last Jedi, the final scene between Rey and Kylo when they're together, after they've killed and battled Snoke, Kylo tells her to join him. Join me, join the dark side. And Rey says no and leaves. But here, you always I think as the audience, you're like, no, take his hand, see what happens next. And here,
just to be clear, he doesn't say join the dark side.
He doesn't say join the dark side.
He says he really wants them to be together.
Yeah, please join me.
Yeah. The begging.
Full on begging.
The yearning.
Whereas here, the point is that
well, sorry, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
Just to add to what I just said about the begging, Leslye Headland herself actually has something to say about that Kylo and Rey scene that she said on the House of R podcast. I'm a fan of that podcast, so
this just came out, right? This podcast episode.
It didn't.
Okay.
I feel like it's a little older, because I feel like I've definitely seen this before. But here's the quote. Okay. When Ben says join me and then please in that really beautiful, distinctive, intimate way, I feel it could have ended the movie there. It felt like the I love you, I know moment to me. Not that he was declaring his love for her in that moment, but that he was saying, I need you. I really need you. I can't exist without you. And if you don't come with me, I'm not sure I can do it. End quote. That's Leslye Headland herself saying that about that moment.
Yeah. Definitely thinking some things. Anyway, but I guess my point of that scene is that I think we all wanted to see what would happen if Rey actually took his hand. So to see Osha here put on the helmet feels like her taking Qimir's hand in a lot of ways. But I think the difference here, which is important for Osha's character, is that she's actually by herself when she puts on the helmet. It's not... Yes, there's obviously the seduction, the desire of Qimir as a sexual figure. I think that's pretty clear throughout this episode. But those moments of him pointing out that it's actually her strength in the Force, not Sol's, and then him leaving her alone here to make the choice to be tempted, to be pulled into the temptation of the helmet itself, not even him, I think was really important. And to see her make this choice for herself. And it really does kind of feel like she will be making something for herself out of Cortosis at some point. That's kind of my next piece of speculation of what will come next for Osha. That's kind of a small thing in the larger story beats here, but I can kind of see it coming.
Is it a small thing?
I don't know.
Does it aid to my Kylo Knights of Ren theory? Because the helmet is already looking like a Knight of Ren theory. Or it's already looking like a Knight of Ren. So what would her next one look like if she made her own? I mean, I feel like it would look pretty similar to his, which then already looks pretty similar to the Knights of Ren helmets, which are unique in their own ways too.
Yeah. I think I've gotten so lost in the sauce in online discourse about Sith versus Knights of Ren. And
I know.
I will say that everything that has come out from like Leslye and like Star Wars social media in a lot of ways has referenced Qimir as a Sith and learning
I know.
about the
I wanted
Sith.
to bring that up. I'm really glad that you're bringing that up.
Yeah.
Because I don't really know how to feel about it because I like the vagueness of it. But at the same time, I think that it kind of goes to what I was saying before about how Leslye wanted to kind of explore these institutions that we're aware of within Star Wars, the Sith, the Jedi, the Senate, the Jedi Council, witches, and kind of poke at them a little bit and see how we can turn them on their head and in terms of their ideologies, and just this realization that have we really seen that many on-screen Sith, especially from like early on beyond like Palpatine and Vader and Maul, and really looking at like what they're after versus just power. I feel like the answer is no, we haven't exactly. So I think that digging super deep, and especially in this era in terms of like what it means to explore the Sith ideology, is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm still here for the Knights of Ren theory, and it still could be Knights of Ren. And because they know when these certain interviews are coming out, they are still only comfortable saying Sith at this point. You know what I mean? In the same way, Manny was like, "Yeah, I didn't get to trade with a lightsaber. I was so bummed."
Yeah.
So I think there's still it could still be something different, but it does feel like a lot of their verbiage around Qimir has been from using the word Sith to describe him. So it could just be as simple as that.
Also, just to note, the Kylo theme plays in the end credits. It also plays, we didn't comment on this, when Qimir gets out of the water. It's really in a high pitch violin. The music throughout this episode is really fascinating. And I think on the water planet, it's very string based, I think you can say a lot about that. Like, what type of music is strings? Are you supposed to be lured in terms of the romanticism of it? But then also, when you think about, I think I mentioned this previously, like the classic horror scores, like the Hitchcock, Bernard Herrmann scores, when you have a famous horror score like Psycho with the high-pitched strings, that's the type of music that we're hearing when it comes to him getting out of the water. We hear Kylo's theme in a high-pitched string arrangement. So what are we supposed to make of that? Because I think it's unsettling, but it's also familiar. So is that all it is? Potentially? I don't know.
Potentially. Yeah.
Leslye did say the Kylo theme is there on purpose. She said that in the interview. I will also link that, by the way. I think we're throwing around a lot of like primary sources. So I'll link that in the show notes. But she did say it was purposeful. So it's not without
reason.
Like it's not without reason. It's not just because it sounds cool or it's like a similar dark side theme. Like, it seems particular that they would play this theme.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so where do we go from here as far as what's left of the series? I think if we're looking at Reylo parallels between like Kylo and Rey, Ben Solo and Rey, and now Osha and Qimir, I think that one of the last big scenes from The Last Jedi is the "You're Not Alone" scene, where Rey and Kylo finally connect emotionally on the same page, I would say. I think that the scene of when Qimir says, "I understand," when he's got the lightsaber at his throat from Osha, I think that's similar to the "You're Not Alone" scene. And that could be, if they are doing more one-to-one parallels, I think that could be the "You're Not Alone" scene for me. But I do think they could push it a little bit further, especially once Osha finds out what has actually happened on Brendok. I'm reminded of Qimir saying to Osha last week on Khofar, like, oh, Sol's your master after everything he's done to you, right? It's so sinister. It's so foreshadowing. Like, what happened? Please tell me. So maybe once she finds out the truth of what happened, we could get another scene of them connecting emotionally. And maybe that's when we also find out what actually happened to Qimir while he was in the Jedi Order, and that they would then they would actually fully take the next steps together in a relationship, enemies to lovers, as the power of two. And I think we'll also see her reconnecting with the Force. May still has to hear the truth from Sol as well. I think to me, kind of the big question mark at this point is, what will May's reaction be to hearing the truth from Sol? I think the path that they put Osha on with Qimir feels to me like she'll kind of lean further into that temptation of the dark side. So I think the question mark is still with May as far as what's going to happen with her hearing the truth directly from Sol, because she does try to kill him at the beginning of this episode with the knife, but it feels like she's kind of warming up to him as time goes on. But then he ends it with tying her down, which feels like it kind of negates all of perhaps some of the good feelings or less bad feelings she was feeling towards him. So I'm really curious to see where their journey will take them as well. It's just, I wish there were 37 more episodes of The Acolyte, and I'm so sad there's only 2.
I know. I feel like we need the season 2 announcement right now.
Yeah.
I think my question is, what is the satisfying ending for this season?
Yeah.
I want to go back. A couple episodes ago, I put a pin in the fact that this is a sister story.
Yeah.
We're talking a lot about Osha and Qimir and like what that means for like the power of two that Qimir is interested in, when previously the power of two was discussed about the twins. I think there's a lot of questions being thrown around of, are the twins supposed to be together? Because it feels like when they are together, chaos reigns. And are they allowed to be on their own separate paths? And the fact that the paths have switched, is that okay? Is that fine? What does that mean for their relationship? I'm reminded again about Leslye Headland talking about her own relationship with her sisters and how she has a really close relationship with one sister and then a really bad relationship with another one that she doesn't speak to. And just thinking about what that means for the series and what she's trying to say about sisterhood, that perhaps you're say if the season ends and they're not back together, right? That the twins are not back together, by like some power of love, right? That I don't know. I wonder if she's saying that like they can go off on their own path. That's very Star Wars to say too, but this acknowledgement that they love each other maybe still exists. I think that would be nice. It's very, remember Leslye pitched this to Kathleen Kennedy as Frozen meets Kill Bill. Frozen really does end with Anna and Elsa realizing their differences and working it out, but then also acknowledging that like they can't ignore each other forever.
The same, yeah.
They're totally different people, but they love each other, and one has a stronger power than the other, and like that's okay as long as they don't shut each other out. And it really does end with like the power of sisters.
Yeah.
And that love, even though there is a relationship that is formed between Anna and I can't even Kristoff.
Yeah, Kristoff.
Yeah, like so she has like a boyfriend by the end of it, but that doesn't have anything to do with the sisterhood. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is like it's okay that they have these other relationships. I think Frozen was sort of revolutionary in that moment because it wasn't this like prince story. It was a story about two sisters saving each other, and one in the very beginning being wronged by the other. And it's very similar to what we're getting in this show, but just coming back to like what would be a satisfying ending, I think that would be satisfying. I think the ending of Frozen is like very surprising and very, very good. And I'm sorry if I just spoiled it for you if you haven't seen it, but it's been like a long time, guys.
I feel like we shouldn't have to put a spoiler warning on Frozen.
I know.
I'll be honest.
I know. But at the same time, like I do think that just because we can zero in and focus on on the sister story and like how their paths meet doesn't mean that they can't have different paths either, because it's Mother Anastasia who said if you want to pull the thread, pull it and go on your own path. They've switched now. Is that good? Are they on the right path? This is why we need another season, because we need to continue to explore this dynamic.
Yeah, when we're thinking about the imagery of the Acolyte title as well, which we've already touched on, of the moons and the way that they eclipse each other. If the moons are meant to represent May and Osha, and as we've seen in the weekly posters from Star Wars, they have moved from the foreground to the background, depending on which episode it is and kind of what story is being told in that episode. And eventually they do eclipse each other, but they can never, if that's them together, which last week was them together on Khofar, more or less, and when they had that hug, which kind of functioned as an eclipse itself of them both being moons, hugging each other totally, and then going on separate paths, can they ever really be together on the same path all the time? Is there a greater power of them together, similar to a dyad in the Force? Are they their own power of two? Can they be on the same path? Do they have to balance each other with one light side, one dark side, in our very general definitions of those terms? I don't know. I think when I think about a satisfying ending where we are right now, because I want so badly to see where this relationship between Qimir and Osha could go, I think it would be so fascinating to actually see them go off together, to continue on this dark path. But then something has changed for May, and then something has changed for May and Osha together. Kind of what you were saying, that there has to be, I think for a satisfying ending, there has to be some kind of realization between the two of them. Another conversation of like, I am you and you are me, but we can still go off separately. Oh, that did kind of rhyme. They've got a new rhyme.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting to see if they actually do end up on fully different paths, even fully different moral paths.
Yeah. Because it would be interesting if Osha recognized that May deserved a chance with the Jedi, even though she's like done with the Jedi. And at this point, like if she's with Qimir and they create a power of two or something and she becomes his pupil, and she's satisfied with that, she has this experience, and maybe it's like she's not even going to be looking at the Jedi with vengeance like May did, and that's sort of an accepting point. She's just on her own path in general. I do want to note also that the show, from its onset, I think from that first like Disney shareholders call when it was announced, that it was focused, that the show was going to be focused on female Darksiders. Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
It was like that was the original tagline for it. I don't have it in front of me. I'm sure I can find it somewhere. So I would not be surprised if we did end with Osha being on the dark side with Qimir. I think that would be for me, I think that would be really satisfying to see that through.
I think
because then we'd have May on the light side.
Yeah, and then there's just more potential to come back to their stories.
Yeah.
And to see if they would eclipse each other again at some point. And would they switch again, or would it be something else? Because I think then our conversations about like redemption would be so interesting to have in a second season, or other stories with these characters too, because that was obviously a huge part of our speculation and discussion with a character like Kylo, who had direct ties to Han Solo and Leia and Luke Skywalker. It felt like that was, we've always said redemption is always on the table for any character for the most part. It's if you see them walking in that direction or having like clues within the story that would lead you to believe that they could or even want to be redeemed. And that was always the thing with Kylo, if he feels the pull to the light, right? I don't really see that in Qimir. And so it would be interesting to see Osha fall in kind of what I've said before, feels more like she has more autonomy in the fall, and to see where that would lead her. We also had the imagery last week of Qimir with the light on his back, right? I don't think we can forget that as well.
Right.
It's just, I feel like I was so surprised with how far they push the desire, the seduction this week, that it would be really exciting to see them actually follow through and keep her on the dark side, and that could actually be a satisfying ending.
Yeah, I really want that.
I know, me too.
I really want that. I really want to see a woman fall to the dark side and explore that in a way that we, the audience, feel like, oh, she made that choice for a reason. And I understand why. With Anakin's fall to the dark side, it's like, oh, I see why he made that choice. I wouldn't have personally made that choice. But and I also see all the different pieces that were going against him when he also made that choice too. Like you feel sympathy for all the different systems that were in place that led him to his fall, even though ultimately it was his own choice, right? Like we've talked about that. And I feel like maybe this could be potentially more gradual with Osha if we see something like that. I also want us to remember that she was the one that was initially crushing the butterfly on Brendok before May approached and did the same thing and that she yelled at May. She was doing that first. So I don't know. There's a lot there. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I'd really like to see I think it would be cool to see an acknowledgement of different sides. It would be also a sort of literal representation of the yin and yang symbol that we started one place and we're going to end in the same place but sort of flipped with these two characters. Fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the possibility that Osha and Qimir, that she develops a new definition for how she uses the Force or moves through the world, that maybe it isn't to the same dark side degree as Qimir was doing. That no, Qimir, we don't actually have to kill all the Jedi. We just need to figure out how to live the way that we want to live. And that maybe this total destruction of the Jedi or people who have seen his face, like Qimir says, is not actually what Osha ends up wanting at the end of it once she has reconnected with the Force. Maybe they both go back to Brendok and find witches that are actually still alive there. I don't know, but there's so many possibilities. And like we've been saying, I want to see the woman fall to her desires into her darkness and see that explored. We've definitely had dark side women. I mean, just the last season in the last season in Bad Batch, we've got the return of Ventress, who she was on the dark side and she was eventually redeemed. And I feel like her personality has always been within that sarcastic dark side realm, even though she's technically not on the dark side anymore. So I don't want to say we don't have dark side women, but Osha feels so special in the sense of watching her give in and really kind of be lured in knowingly in a lot of ways too, and wanting to tap into that piece of herself. And I think that would be fun to see as women as well, if we're talking about the female gaze of being consumed by that temptation and getting pleasure out of it, and then becoming a new version of herself, the butterfly, the hatching, the metamorphosis, if we want to bring it back to the butterfly as well.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. Oh boy, I feel like we've talked about a lot. This is definitely a relationship that I feel like we'll be coming back to a lot, just like the Reylo relationship. It feels very foundational. I'm not even going to lie to you. And I'm sure there's a lot of tidbits and symbolism that we've missed throughout this discussion, but that just means we'll get to have more discussions in the future. So is there anything else you want to add? Any other tidbits before we wrap up?
No, oh my God, I'm just really happy.
I'm so happy. I'm literally so happy. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this discussion of Sky Talkers, of the Acolyte, Teach/Corrupt. I cannot wait to see what the title is next week. And I'm really hoping that I do have to add this one last thing. I really hope that next week is not just flashback, because I'm like, you cannot give me this
I think it might be
seduction like this and then take it away next week.
I know.
Even if it's just a little bit at the beginning or end, I'll take it. You know what I mean? But I can't quit them cold turkey like that.
I know. Especially with only 2 episodes left.
I know. So I need a little something to get me through into the finale.
I know. Me too.
But thank you guys so much, as always, for listening. If you'd like to tell us your thoughts or share your favorite GIFs or fan edits, because I know that the fan cams are already out there, please send them to us on Twitter at the podcast, which is at SkyTalkersPod, or our personal handles. Mine is at Caitlin Plusher and Charlotte's is at Clarity. We also have our website, skytalkers.com, our email, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. Those are all really great places to find us. And if you have a couple seconds and would like to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would so appreciate it. You can also share in real time that you're listening to the show and tag us, and we will repost it and share it on whatever social media platform you prefer. And if you're interested in other ways to support us, you can head on over to our Patreon and check out our reward tiers there.
I want to say a huge thank you to these patrons: Adam, Greg, Draconis Rex, Jenny, Robin, Kylie, David, Corey, Ben, Emily, Kat, Brooke, Eugene, David, Triumphant Ewok, Maximilian, Pam, GMO, Gary, Jenny, Olivia, Lindsay, Charlotte, Tim, Jonah, Carol, Simon, Paul, Danny, Becky, James, and Rachel. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.